Equestria, the land I love, a land of harmony. Our flag does wave from high above for pony kind to see. Equestria, a land of friends, where pony kind do roam. They say true friendship never ends. Equestria.
Hello everyone! So, some of you may realize that this animation was quite familiar, especially if you follow my work for a while. And that's because this animation is a remake of my very first MLP fan animation I ever did 5 years ago. For those who are curious what the differences are between this animation and the remake, allow me to show you a side-by-side comparison.
Equestria, the land I love, a land of harmony. Our flag does wave from high above for pony kind to see. Equestria, a land of friends, where pony kind do roam. They say true friendship never ends. Equestria.
I think it is only fitting to insert an awkward post-commentary section, since my original upload from 5 years ago did this as well, where I talked about my goals and concerns for the future of my work at the time. First things first, I want to get to the main reason why I wanted to talk here today. I admit, it's a bit embarrassing to show where I started. After all this time, I know its faults, and it definitely doesn't represent how I do my animation work today. I could easily just delete the old video if I wanted to, but I'm not going to. Because I think at the same time, it is also invaluable to show other people where I started, especially people who are beginners at a new field, of any kind really. One of the most common reasons why people give up learning something new is that they see their quality of work as they start out being below their expectations, and they can't fathom how they will ever get good enough to produce the work they actually want to do. But I want to set an example as someone who was in that situation. I started out this pony project 5 years ago with very little experience and no professional experience. I was nearly fresh out of high school, but I wanted to do this. I had a lot of passion within me that I wanted to express, so I dived in, making the rigs and models from scratch and seeing where that took me. I did have some intuition with animation at the time, though still very unrefined, but my modeling and rigging skills back then were absolute garbage. And I knew it was garbage, but I kept going anyway. This pony project was way more than a one and done deal. To make models once to see how it goes, and move on to something else? That is not what I wanted to do, because I feel like I would just be moving on from something I had a lot of boiled up passion for. I did not want to let go of that, because there is one thing I've learned about myself as I grew up more than anything, is that I thrive on passion. I struggle to keep going if I can't find something to get excited about. So I, instead, let my passion drive me. Whatever challenges face me, no matter how difficult, no matter how much stress and time I have to put into something to find a solution for any given problem, I know that I will still have that passionate drive for it. Why? It's hard to say for sure, honestly, but I can make a guess. Every time I struggle and start to slow down, losing motivation, I can always look back at where I started. And then look back at where I am at now. No matter how bad my situation may be in current times, I will always know that I have managed to improve in many ways in how I develop my work. And the only reason I am where I'm at now is because of my passionate drive to do something. And it's all the more reason to keep going, because I want to give back to the thing that kickstarted my passion. How can I not give back to something that helped me so much? If I give up now, what would that all have been for? If I give up now, how would I be able to keep going? If I give up now, I will never be able to give back to what I love. So I keep going. I keep learning. I'll always be improving, but I'll always be struggling, and that's okay. And that leads me to the second thing I want to talk about today, which is how I am currently doing, where I'm at right now. And Well, right now, I'm quite happy with where I'm at. And now when I say that, I definitely do not mean I have reached any kind of level of perfection, don't be silly. I am happy where I'm at, but I also know what things I could still be working on and refining to keep improving myself as an animator and a 3D artist in general. For example, if we look at this animation, you'll see a very recent addition to the aesthetic look of my models, and that's the addition of the fur coat. This is something I've really wanted to do for quite some time, but struggled to implement it in a way where I'm both pleased with it aesthetically, as well as not running into technical roadblocks, which is awfully common when working with hair simulations, as some who have worked with this stuff may be quite familiar with already, especially if it's something that needs to be animated. So this idea was put off for a while, but once MLP G5 was announced, with gorgeous looking CG renders of the new pony aesthetic, it got me thinking of other ideas on how I could properly approach this idea. Before now, I kept trying fur coat aesthetic ideas that kept the fur strands fairly straight and reacted to physics more, but G5 doesn't really do that. G5 has a more felt-like aesthetic for the overall fur coat, then slowly transitions into straighter, longer strands as the fur coat approaches the fetlocks around the hooves. That was all over a year ago now, and this has been something I've been thinking about since then. I only am tackling this now because I've also been preoccupied with more official, professional business that had me quite preoccupied and unable to allocate enough time to really properly tackle this kind of task. But now, today, I have a window of time to try this. So I went for it. I am very happy where I ended up with how it looks, knowing that this is my first try, but there are some things I know I want to improve on as well. For example, there's a thing I want to address for future attempts, which is near the fetlocks region for all the legs. If we take a close look, we can see fairly obvious exposed roots for the fur as the fur wraps around the hoof, right down the middle. This isn't really ideal, but I've already got a couple ideas on how to address this that I still want to try out later. There's also some pretty glaring hair collision bugs during some more extreme poses around the hooves that I'll need to somehow work out later too. And I'm sure some are curious, but this is what this animation will look like with the older aesthetic. Some may still like it, but for me, it's hard to imagine me going back to this style at this point. The shading just feels too flat. I'll just keep letting this play in the background and move on. Anyway, it's always about thinking about how to improve yourself in this kind of situation. Especially when you're in a position where you're nearly completely self-taught. You are the only person you can truly rely on to figure something out. And that gets harder the more technical you get. You may have also noticed that the hooves are now way more defined in my models than they were before. Now, the coloration and material of the hooves are still subject to change, especially based on feedback, but since we have fur now, ideally, in order to make the fur convincing, I can't have the fur growing out the region of the character where the actual solid hooves should be. I still have other hoof and fetlock color options should I feel it be necessary. I could go for a more subtle approach and use the same exact color as the fur coat for the hooves, so that they stand out less while maintaining the more solid looking material. I could also go for more of a muted, complementary, and or other related colors that fits the character well, while also not standing out as much as using a more obvious color. And these kinds of decisions may also need to be made on a per character basis, because a more obvious color for one character may not look as good on another just based on the character's color scheme, design, and personality. There's also another experimental thing I'm trying out alongside the fur coat change, and that's the introduction of some eyeshadow color variations for some characters. Not every character will have a full-on different hue of color, but since the eyelids won't exactly be covered with fur like the rest of the body, it's always going to stand out as something that looks a little bit different. Simply because it's the bare mesh we're looking at rather than light bouncing off thousands of hair strands in a small area. And finally, there's one last, somewhat minor change to the base model we see here that isn't as obvious, but I have learned is still pretty essential. The front legs for my base model has always been shaped strangely, without me realizing why and where I've gone wrong. But after being away for some time, as mentioned before, I've had a lot of time to think and reflect on my past work. And now to me it's quite obvious. The hooves before were just peg legs essentially. They were way too straight. Having fully straight legs has some nice benefits for rigging and posing flexibility for certain things, but when just trying to make the pony model pose like a normal pony on all fours, it can get a bit awkward. So, I addressed this, and adjusted the shape of the legs to be more properly shaped to what you'd expect, especially around the hooves area, which is all the more important now that I'm going for a more detailed aesthetic with the hair particles. I also remember a piece of feedback I got quite a few years ago of someone mentioning how oddly straight the front legs looked. I didn't really fully accept what they were saying at the time, but it goes to show that even if a piece of constructive criticism doesn't make sense at first, it can still help you even years later once you realize that they were onto something. And there you go, that's about all I wanted to say. If you somehow managed to listen through all that and reach to the end of this video, thank you. I don't often include talks like this in my animation videos these days, but I felt for this one in particular that it was important. Thank you for listening, and adios.